This woman covered in blood is giving birth, but behind her there's a horde of walkers. But she had to give birth to the baby right there. At this point, she shed tears of despair, because the zombie bit her on the arm during the escape. It won't be long before she too becomes a bloodthirsty monster. In order for the child in her womb to grow up healthy like a normal human being, she had to fight to have it. Just see her tear off a piece of clothing on her body into her mouth and bite down firmly. Not only can you avoid making a sound for the walkers to find, she can also relieve yourself of some pain. How she wished for Lady Luck at this point. But her hands and feet had begun to slowly mutate, and her pupils slowly became dull. Even the teeth grew into the face, and the outside was already occupied by zombies. The rest of the people were running away or being torn apart by them. The zombies have gradually become monsters due to the mutation of the virus. Most of the world has been taken over by them. Almost every day is spent in killing and bloodshed. This life went on for 7 years. The baby that was born in the zombie pile did not die, nor was the mother bitten and turned into a zombie. Instead, they grew up healthy as normal people. But she spent every day in fear, because she was often chased by her zombie mother. So often hide in the corner shivering. Even so, my mother, who had a good sense of smell, found me. And then she held me tightly with her hands and wouldn't let go. See her open a bloody mouth towards me to bite. I could only shed tears of pain and helplessness. My mouth kept screaming for my mother not to do this to me. She was actually just playing hide and seek with me, because even though my mother turned into a zombie, but because of her family, she has 1/3 of her humanity. And she loved me even more. For example, I want to go out with her before every outing. But no matter how much I pleaded with my mother, she wouldn't. But even if I pampered her, she wouldn't say yes. Because the outside world is still occupied by zombies. To keep me at home, my mother would look at me with sharp fangs and murderous eyes. In fact, she wouldn't take me out because it was too dangerous outside and she was worried about my safety. Unable to speak, she could only write with her hand on my palm. And this time, the mother went out to look for Little Bear. I had no choice but to ask her to come back as soon as possible. I didn't expect her to meet a long-necked monster right after she left the house. The next second, his long tongue came directly at the woman. Seeing this, she used her nimble body to dodge it perfectly. And a spike slowly sticks out from the back of her head. And then quickly attacked the monster. In the blink of an eye, she pierced the thick-skinned monster. He shuddered as she didn't react. Just felt a paralysis coming on. The next second, he passed out heavily. Looking at the food on the floor, woman can't help but drool. But this monster tastes worse than shit. In order to fill her stomach, she could only barely eat. Just as the woman was eating, several shots suddenly rang out behind her. 2 humans are shooting at an oncoming group of monsters. They seem to be afraid of the light. When the man shone his flashlight on them, they were instantly petrified. But more and more monsters came, but the 2 of them simply could not last the morning. The woman on the side looked at them and thought, how could there be survivors out there at this hour? And don't they know that this low-damage light and the sound of bullets will irritate them more instead? Forget it, it's none of her business if they live or die. Suddenly, she noticed something familiar about the long-haired man's backpack. She quickly rushed towards him. Sensing danger, the long-haired man immediately turned on his flashlight and shone it at the woman, who came in front of them in the blink of an eye, followed by a heavy whip kick on the man in red. The next second he fell to the ground and made a painful sound. The companions saw this and told her to get out of the way, holding up a pistol and shivering. He did not know that this would completely anger the woman. But she didn't hurt the man, just took the bag off his back, leaving the long-haired man to fend for himself in the face of the walkers. At this point, the man felt completely devastated. But the next second, they stopped in their tracks. Seeing this scene, the man instantly revealed a long-lost smile. He thought to himself, could it be that he has some kind of immunity? And just when he thought he was saved, but felt a few drops of water fall on his head. And then, he saw a monster standing behind him. 7 years ago, the woman struggled hard to give birth to her child. But by now the outside was surrounded by layers of zombies. She could only hold her baby tightly and hide in the corner. As long as there are zombie monsters approaching, they will be wiped out by the woman. This day, a living person came here by mistake. The man saw the corpses all over the floor and tried to turn away. But then a child's cry suddenly came from behind. In his curiosity, he slowly walked towards the house. But the next second, there was a sharp needle against the front of his throat. A closer look reveals a monster covered in blood. It looks like she's breastfeeding. This is the scene where the woman first meets her husband Cub. Looking at the school bag on the back of the long-haired man, the woman remembered a scene from the past. She quickly grabbed the school bag from the back of the other party and left, and then rushed around to look for the bear. At this point, the bear were all robbed of their weapons. Even more unlucky is that the school bag was also stolen. Relying on a broken stone in his hands alone, he did not know how long he could hold out. Just when he was at his wit's end and ready to die, suddenly he heard rustling footsteps. In the next second, a sharp needle suddenly appeared in the neck. A closer look revealed that it was his wife. But after the mutation, she couldn't remember who the man in front of her was. And then she roared at him. The woman looked at the familiar and unfamiliar face in front of her. Seems to remember something. Just when the man thought he was going to be killed by his wife. Instead, his wife gave him a big hug. The man looks at his mutated wife, who has risked her life to find herself. And she found his stolen backpack. After a moment's rest, the two were ready to go home. The road was full of zombies. However, these little pieces of garbage are no match for a woman. The spikes on the back of her head kill a walker with each attack. To escape the zombie hordes, the couple had to run towards the narrow hallway. Weak fighting power of the bear can only use the torch to shine so that the zombies temporarily stop attacking. Suddenly the two of them seemed to see something horrible. Both eyes stared straight up. In front of them was the fractured skyscraper. Looking at the 100-meter-high floor man side, this is completely finished. Coincidentally, the flashlight also ran out of power at this point. The two men looked at the monsters that kept coming towards them. They both wanted to stay behind and let the other go first. In their respective hearts, they both wanted to keep each other alive. The man raised his gun and shouted, "Come here, monsters." The next second, he was grabbed by an unknown object. The woman who saw the scene ignored the zombies in front of her. One hand held the bear in a death grip. The other hand grabbed the steel bars on the tall building. But the tentacles that pulled him were too strong. This will not last long at all. When the man saw the huge thing below him, he instantly broke into a cold sweat. A giant monster was pulling on his foot with its tentacles and wouldn't let go. It can't help but salivate at the food in front of it. However, the bear above, let out a hysterical scream. Because the tentacles that were wrapped around his feet were getting tighter and tighter. The number of zombie monsters on the woman's side was also increasing. The hands of the two people holding each other also began to tremble. If this continues, they will surely be buried here. Without thinking, she immediately let go of her grip on the steel bar. The monster below quickly pulls the two downward. The bear who saw the scene was puzzled. But the woman showed a creepy smile. The monster below is still licking its tongue. At this point, the two were getting closer and closer to each other's mouths. Just when we thought the couple was going to become its delicacy, the woman immediately swung sharp needle at the monster above, and immediately pulls one of them downward, and then quickly threw it at the gargoyle's head below. Smoothly pierce each other's tongue tied to the husband's feet with a sharp needle. The monster felt the pain coming on and let go. The woman who saw the scene felt very relieved. Just wait until you land and get rid of the surrounding monsters. This will protect the bear well. At that moment she was suddenly held tightly by the other side. She feels very happy to smell her husband's sweat. A few moments later the two fell heavily on the head of the monster. The crowd of zombies who saw the scene was stunned. Due to inertia, two people were bounced away. Then they fell heavily to the ground and tumbled for tens of meters. But the man didn't have time to catch his breath before he immediately got up. Carrying his wife, he fled quickly. Trolls look at the mouth of the food fled. He showed his horrible face in anger. Can the couple really escape from his clutches? Along the way they kept asking each other about their injuries. They were relieved to know that neither of them was hurt. Just as the woman was thinking about why her husband was so good to her, the body was suddenly pierced by the monster's sharp horns. The bear who saw the scene shouted out to the other side, looking back to find out. The person who came is the monster just now. He was licking his tongue like he was ready for a feast. It didn't know that the mutated woman was physically unusually strong. This little wound doesn't do anything for her, but the zombies behind her were like shadows that could not be shaken off. While the man was rummaging in his backpack, when the zombies were about to jump on the two men, the woman held back the pain from her wounds and quickly swung the needle at several of the monsters in front of her. They were obliterated in an instant. But then the zombies that were coming seemed to see something deadly, and they were shouting nervously. The next second, a hand grenade appears in front of them. Before they could react, they were blown to pieces. Seeing the effects of expired grenades, Bear threw all the grenades out of the bag. In an instant, the zombies that came after them were blown to pieces. Only the one with the broken hands is still struggling to hold on, but the gargoyle standing behind him was unharmed. However, there was only one grenade left in his hand. The woman saw this and hurriedly asked the bear to hand it to her. The woman who had taken the grenade was surprisingly quick to run towards the front. The gargoyle who saw this had a disdainful expression, and then immediately reached out towards the two of them. Sensing danger, the man told his wife to get out of the way while he quickly fell to the ground. However, the woman not only does not dodge, instead, she turned around and faced the troll. Seeing this scene, the bear was furious and yelled out, "Silly wife, what are you doing? You're too far away from him, you know that?" However, the woman had already pulled the safety off. With the bear looking on in horror, woman tosses grenade in midair, and then kicked hard with his feet towards the gargoyle. But the gargoyle looked at the grenade coming towards him with a question mark on his face. However, the next second he caught it with his mouth. He didn't react, his head was instantly exploded. The woman landed with ease and comfort, and not forgetting to give the dead troll a friendly gesture. The man saw such a smart and powerful wife, and rushing towards her with a smile. The two of them ran away before the zombies arrived in the distance. The bear, worried about his wife's injury, hurriedly asked the other side to lift his clothes to check. The wound that was pierced by the gargoyle just now had healed. The man smiled with relief when he found that his wife was no longer in danger. To keep his daughter from worrying, they rushed towards home. With no walkers in the way, the two soon arrived at the house. Hearing the father's voice, the daughter rushed towards them, randomly giving him a big hug, randomly rubbing his rough cheek over and over, and not forgetting to show her father her finished homework. Seeing such a good and understanding daughter, he lifted her up high with joy, and to reward his daughter, he brought gifts from outside. The father pulled out what turned out to be a chocolate bar. She stopped calling him bear when she got her favorite snack. The woman on the sidelines was so happy to see her family. Even when she's tired, she feels full of strength. She thought to herself, no matter what happens in the future, I will be by their side for the rest of my life. While the family was happy and jumping for joy, there was a stranger standing outside the door. Is this icy man an enemy or a friend? Mother and daughter in the process of avoiding the zombies, stumbling upon a normal man. After a long time of helping each other, not only did the man become the wife of the woman, but also the father of a child. That's it. A family of 3 forms a happy family in a world full of blood and gore. We don't just have 3 meals a day together, even sleeping in the same bed. But every time I ate, my mother was watching, and I never saw her eat. She could not speak, but she always wrote down the words she wanted to express in my hand, always telling me to eat more and grow up faster. But I always wondered what my mother ate. To find out, I then took out my precious snacks and handed them to my mother, and told her the cookies were super good. But she said with a helpless face that she couldn't eat such things. When she saw my innocent and cute expression, she had to reach out carefully to take it. I saw this and I took it back, and then reluctantly broke off a small piece. Reluctantly handed it to my mother with a smile. I didn't expect her to look at me with a helpless face, and then my father came over and asked me to give him a bite. I rushed to put the cookie in my mouth, thinking that my mother could eat other things. So I brought her a noodle and handed it to her, and the sugar that I always eat. My mother saw that I was bothering her a lot. In an instant she actually let out a hysterical roar. Never seen such a horrible scene of my mother. My eyes were wet with tears at once. She was very sorry to see my aggrieved face, just when my mother was about to stop hiding it from me. When she was about to tell me the truth, her pupils suddenly became dull. I kept calling out to try to get her to wake up. However, seeing the nosebleed I left behind, she turned into a bloodthirsty monster. Just when we thought the woman would eat her own child, she had quickly opened the door and ran out. My father, who heard the sound, rushed to check on me. By now the woman had come outside, just in time to bump into another horrible woman. Just as she was smiling and facing the woman, her opponent's arm had penetrated her body, followed by a long-awaited excited laugh, followed by the use of sharp fingernails to dismember the opponent, and then shoving her flesh into her mouth one by one, while eating a delicious meal, and thinking about protecting her daughter in her head. I can't eat my own family. I have to wake up now. But the sweet taste is so fragrant and so tempting. Children's skin and flesh, think about it, will be drooling, thinking about it. And the woman threw her head back and let out a hissing sound that rang through the sky. It didn't take long. Mother came home and lay with us in the same bed. and she looked at me sleeping and she thought to herself, I never thought the smell of a child's blood would be so appealing to me. Something almost went wrong just now. I must concentrate. I have to be careful, especially in front of monsters, so that I can protect my family around me. Early the next morning my father was going out to look for supplies and kept reminding me not to wake up my mother, or he would punish me. And then he walked out with his backpack. Looking at his father who had left the house, I smiled a strange and happy smile, because I could sneak out while my mother was asleep, and soon I was ready to go out. I was humming a little song as I walked down the street full of walkers, and I was looking for something useful in the ruins. This is when a man and a woman came into my sight, but I didn't care. I was painting smiling faces on the rocks with watercolors. And then I rushed off to find food and things that I could use. And as I shoveled down a piece of dirt, I felt a chill come over me. What would I see in this ruin of bodies? A 7-year-old girl is looking for supplies in a place full of zombies. And not only is she not afraid, but she is happily drawing on the ground, because her mother was a powerful zombie queen, able to kill thousands of zombies by herself. But there are still guys who are not afraid of death, have bad thoughts about her. Looking at the girl so clean, her parents must be with her, thinking that if we catch her we'll be able to get a fortune in supplies. Without much time to think, the two men went after the girl. It didn't take long to find her walking around a corner. And one of the women saw this and immediately swung a baseball bat at her. But she didn't know that danger was coming towards them. At that moment a man suddenly appeared behind the male companion and swung his axe at him. The woman stopped immediately after hearing the sound. When she looked back, her companion had fallen to the ground. Behind him stood a white-haired woman with an axe. The companion, lying in a pool of blood, tried to tell her to run, but could not make a sound. The woman who saw this scene was puzzled. Just as she was asking who the other person was, the white-haired man strides towards her. But the woman laughed without a care. Your disdainful eyes are scary. I'll look like you're going to kill someone. Are you the parents of that child? But I haven't done anything yet. After saying that, she swung her baseball bat at her opponent. And that's when the white-haired woman felt something was wrong. But when she turned around, she realized that the man who had just fallen to the ground had disappeared. Apparently when the woman was talking to him just now, the man had gone after the little girl. By now the woman had swung her baseball bat in front of him, but in the next second, her neck was cut off by his opponent. In an instant, the head and the body were separated, without seeing how the other side struck. On the other side, I was hiding in the corner, shivering, not even knowing that danger is slowly approaching me. In the blink of an eye, the white-haired woman was behind me, and when I turned my head to look, I found that it was my missing sister Gila. Just as she asked me how I got here, neither of us knew that a hand was slowly approaching me. The next second, the monster fiercely opened its bloody mouth towards me. However, he was hit with an axe on his skull by Gila, and then he landed heavily on the ground. And even then, he was still looking at me. After struggling for a while, he retracted his head into his arm. I was in disbelief when I saw this scene. But Sister Gila was used to it. She kept asking me why I was out there alone. Where are your parents? Why are they not with you? But my mind is all in that creepy hand. I didn't even pay attention to what she was saying. As a result, my head was knocked out by her a big bag. I had to agree to all of her demands in silence. Never go alone without your parents in the future. And yet she continues to chatter, saying that I don't take her words to heart. Seeing this, I had to retort, I've grown up. I can now go outside and look for supplies. This will take the pressure off my father. You can't forbid me to go out. I didn't expect to get that murderous look in her eyes. I was in a cold sweat for a moment. She changed her mind after seeing me moping, but only let me go to places where there were adults later. I didn't know what she meant. However, the next moment, she was going to take me out. I was so happy to hear this. Holding her hand towards the adults where they should go, and soon we saw where Sister Gila had said. But not only was it dark all around, but there was a foul smell coming from it. I felt so warm at home at that moment. I hurriedly called out to Sister Gila, but there was nothing but an echo. Don't be ridiculous, I really know I'm wrong. Who knew that her voice would come from the darkness to scold me? Aren't you the one who wants to come to this place? And you're a grown-up, why are you scared so soon? You know, monsters love dark places like this, but the adults know that the necessities of life are available here, which is why they come here. So there was a lot of bloodshed here. Seeing this, I hurriedly looked for the place where her voice was coming from and went. But I slipped and fell to the ground. And I think I touched something sticky and gooey. A closer look reveals that it is disgusting blood. I was so scared that I ran ahead on all fours and kept shouting, "I'm sorry for being wrong. I don't want to be an adult anymore. Good sister, please take me home." But even though I was crying, she was still just watching in the dark, looking ahead into the darkness. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing down my face. At that moment, I was in a daze, as if I saw my parents in front of me, thinking that they often risked their lives to come to places like this to find supplies. At this point, I seemed to understand something, and Sister Gila came to me and said, "It's dark and smelly and want to go home. This is where we, as adults, often come." Hearing this, I cried and said, "Actually, adults can be afraid too. But I had to come to this kind of place in order to live. So from now on I won't sneak out anymore." As I was speaking, Sister Gila was reaching out to let me go home. But just now I clearly saw the monster's blood. Why didn't I even see any of them all the way down? And yet, Sister Gila just replied coldly, "They're all asleep." Actually, I don't know. Those monsters were wiped out by Sister Gila before they even came into my sight, and their heads were chopped off and piled up into a mountain. 35 degrees below zero on a snowy day. But there was a 6-year-old girl rummaging through the garbage cans for food, and all around her are walkers. But she wasn't a bit cold or scared. Instead, she hummed a children's song while looking for supplies, just because her parents were in the neighborhood. Her mother is also the queen of the zombies in this 10-mile radius. That's when she saw a strange thing. And when she got close enough to see it, she realized that it was a person. Young and ignorant, I thought I had found something good. Although she had white hair, her face was dirty. Driven by curiosity, I went up to her and asked how she was doing. But the white-haired woman whispered to me to get out of the way. Seeing her fierce look, I instantly broke into a cold sweat. She saw that I was still standing in front of her and didn't move. She scolded in a stern voice, "Little brat, don't you understand human language? I'll tell you to get as far away as you can." But at only 6 years old, I had no idea what she was saying. Seeing my innocent and cute face, she turned her head and whispered to me to leave her alone. Let me go to my parents. When I saw her frozen hands, I rushed to massage her with my little hands. Jufu helps you huff and puff to warm you up, but my good intentions were taken for an ass. Keep telling me to let go and not to touch her. Suddenly, her other hand came at me violently. The next second she found herself rubbing her hand back and forth on my warm face. The woman who saw this scene instantly stopped attacking the naive child. This is actually the scene where Sister Gila and I first met last year. Whenever I think of this scene, I wake up from my dream. Yesterday, she saved me from the bad guys and took me home after educating me. I didn't expect that the moment I opened the door to go home, I found that my index finger was slightly purple. I looked at the situation with a puzzled face and wondered what was going on. When my parents found out about my situation, they rushed to the hospital ruins to look for medicine. Because my fingers had been poisoned by a zombie. If don't find the drug in time to control it, I will become a zombie. But at this point, even in broad daylight, the number of zombies outside hadn't decreased at all. However, the couple, who were worried about their daughter, still risked their lives to look around. The woman was so anxious that her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The cold sweat on her forehead kept flowing down, but in her heart she kept blaming herself. If it wasn't for her sleeping in, daughter wouldn't have sneaked out. What if there's something wrong with her body? The bear looked at his wife, who was in a state of collapse, and shouted, "Enough! If you blame yourself like this, Jufu won't get better. It doesn't make any sense at all, you know? There's no medicine or anything else here either. We've been looking at hospitals and pharmacies for days. But nothing came up. We were just doing something stupid to begin with." And then the man thought of Hope Village. I heard there was a doctor there. The wife on the sidelines was instantly awake when she heard her husband's words, and hurriedly inquired, "Is there really a doctor there?" But in the next second, the bear doused the woman's ignited hopes with a pot of cold water. Because you have to pay a toll to get into that village, or you have to give something of value. But where can we come up with something of value at this point in time when we are penniless? The woman listened and came up with a bold idea. She plans to go to the underground village alone. There must be something valuable there. The husband gulped as he listened. Just because it's a monster's lair. Even if you're a zombie queen, it's still 9 deaths. But the woman's determined eyes had put the danger out of her mind. And I'm agile. Once danger is detected, there's no problem escaping. Plus I've been there before and probably know the way. The man listened and could only helplessly say that he could not participate. He could only wait at home with his daughter for the safe return of his wife. After that he went to his backpack to look for a flashlight and necessities. However, after opening the backpack, the couple was full of questions. Because the daughter was sleeping inside and making intermittent snoring sounds. At this point, they couldn't bear to look at the little kid in front of them. What's even more annoying is that she woke up at this point, and acting like you haven't slept enough. The woman who saw this scene was instantly angry and wanted to eat her daughter in front of her. I was puzzled to find my mother suddenly like this. I thought she was messing with me and hurriedly raised my hand in response, and I got a scolding from my father. "You don't know what you're doing. Didn't I tell you to stay home properly? I told you it's cloudy these days. There's gonna be a lot of zombie monsters out there." After that, he knocked a big bag on my head. The angry woman on the side rushed to stop it. Immediately afterwards, with her hand, she wrote on her husband's hand, "It just so happens that the daughter is outside. You take her home with you." After that, she got up and went to the underground village. I hurriedly went after my mother. "Where are you going? Why don't you take me with you?" And with that, tears of sadness flowed. Seeing her daughter so pampered, she hurriedly let out a roar, and then she shook off her hand and walked forward with great strides. Can a woman get something of value to Hope Village in a zombie lair full of monsters? As she walks through the monsters, a familiar voice comes from behind her. Turning her head, she found a cardboard box on the ground. There were all kinds of zombie monsters around, and they're drooling with their tongues. The box seems to be filled with delicious food. At this point, the carton suddenly emitted an intermittent scream. The woman felt a little uneasy hearing the familiar voice. At this point, the group of zombies have opened their claws and pounced on the box, but they couldn't see anything after they tore the cardboard box apart. But with a keen sense of smell, they instantly noticed something strange overhead, and only when they looked closely did they find a little girl hanging in midair. It turned out that the woman heard the child's voice and quickly brought it over. However, the mother and daughter were already surrounded by the zombies, and just when we thought they were dead for sure, the agile woman leapt from above them. How could the hungry zombies let the duck in their mouths fly away? They rushed to attack the mother and daughter. The woman who sensed the danger coming let out a roar. The spike at the back of the head was swung out in a smooth motion to cut it off. Then she carried me to the ground steadily. But some of the zombies wouldn't stop coming at us. As a result, they were pierced through half of the body by the mother's claw. The rest of the head and limbs instantly flew all over the sky. A few moments later, the mother was already panting. If this goes on, the mother and her son will be consumed alive when the woman is ready to use the trick. At this point, I noticed that the dark clouds in the sky had suddenly cleared. After hearing my shout, the zombies looked up. But it was too late. The sun's burns made them howl in pain. The mother who saw this scene also sweated, and then I ran towards the underground village with my arms, because that's the only place to completely escape from the zombies. But just 2 steps, the mother's back was suddenly attacked by a walker. The mother cried out with the pain that came instantly. I shed tears of remorse when I saw this scene. If it weren't for me, my mother wouldn't have been hurt and bled. But the zombie who drank the blood was laughing, while also attacking the mother's back. But my mother let him slash at her back in order for me to get out of here as soon as possible. While I was crying and shouting for my mother to dodge, suddenly an axe hit the zombie on the head. The next second, it fell straight to the ground. The mother, who didn't know where the axe came from, rushed back to check. But when she saw the bloodthirsty horde of zombies behind her, she immediately made a mad dash for the underground village. At that moment, Bear arrived sweating and panting. But when he saw the scene in front of him, he froze in his tracks, because the entrance to the underground village was blocked by the zombies. Seeing this, he was so angry that he gritted his teeth. In an instant, he fell directly to his knees, feeling very sorry for himself. If it wasn't for the sudden stomachache, he went to the bathroom after his wife left, and the daughter wouldn't have sneaked out. This would not have happened if I had held back a little. And while he was regretting, he didn't know that danger was slowly approaching him. It was not until the other side came behind him that he realized. He slowly glanced back at the other man. He realized it was a woman with white hair, just as Bear was shouting out who she was. And the axe had smashed into his face. The other side. My mother, who had found a safe place, was reprimanding me incessantly. "Knowing that I am worried about you, you still follow me. What would you have me do if something happened to you?" After hearing that, I hurriedly wrote on her hand. "In fact, I was worried that you were in danger, so I came with." Even my father doesn't say it. "I know that you want me to grow up healthy and happy. You all go home injured every day. Both of you are obviously in pain, but you are gritting your teeth to endure. I don't want my mother to be hurt for me anymore." After I said that, I had a snotty nose and a tear running down my face. The woman looked at her daughter, who was so worried about her, and instantly choked up. Deep breaths. Immediately afterwards, she hugged her loving daughter tightly. At this moment, a group of zombies were staring at the mother and daughter in front of them. Can they escape from this disaster? This is a huge hand as big as a mountain. One slap can kill hundreds of monsters. But there was one human girl she didn't dare hurt, because her mother was a powerful zombie queen. But this time, the mother and the mother underestimated each other's strength. Just now, the woman had to break into the underground village with her daughter to escape the bloodthirsty monster. I didn't expect to escape from the monsters outside for a while. But inside, there were zombies all over the place. The woman who saw this rushed to wrap her daughter in her clothes, and then carefully walked out. Just when the woman thought she could make it to the exit without any problems, a hairy monster suddenly appeared behind her. The woman who felt a chill down her back instantly broke out in a cold sweat, but she had to calm down for the sake of her daughter. As long as they don't move, the other side doesn't know there's a living thing. Even if his hair wraps itself around me, I can't counterattack. Otherwise, a careless daughter would be in danger. But that monster was unusually nasty. Licked the woman's whole body with the tongue continuously, even though the other side treated her so badly. But the woman wouldn't even let go of the daughter she was holding in her hands. Just when we thought she was giving up, the monster behind her actually released the binding hair. However, the next second the other side actually revealed its true face and laughed. "Beauty, it's hard for you to hold on for so long." The woman heard the words and immediately looked back, but there was no long-haired monster behind her. It's all just some silly zombies. She thought, where did the other side run to in such a short time? Suddenly, there was a violent shaking at the exit, only to find that a giant hand was reaching out from the ground. Not yet reacted to the other side has been heavily smashed down. The good thing is that the woman is very agile, so she escaped a robbery. Seeing a giant hand crush dozens of monsters alive. As the woman guessed that the other man was the owner of the underground village, the other hand was already rapidly coming towards them. Coincidentally, the exit was blocked by a swarm of monsters. Seeing that the situation was not good, my mother hurriedly threw me out, but she and the monsters were pinned down by giant hands. The next second, the other side had them dead in their hands. 7 years old, I saw the scene instantly frozen in place. When I saw my mother's pained expression, I couldn't help but bawl my eyes out. This huge hand was so strong that my mother screamed out in pain. Seeing this, I rushed to find help with hot tears. At that moment, the eyes of the owner of the giant hand instantly lit up. The strength of the hand was slowly increasing. And instantly the woman felt a little breathless. And while gasping for air, she was in a hurry to figure out what to do. The only way to do it now is to concentrate on the power in your hands. The woman who feels enough power to attack immediately raises her sharp right hand and grabbed it violently towards her opponent's index finger. The gargoyle who felt the stinging pain let out a roar that rang through the sky, while rushing to let go of a few monsters in his hands. The woman who landed on the ground had an instant burst of pain in her fingers. In order to find her daughter as soon as possible, she rushed ahead and ran wildly. But the owner of the zombie was walking slowly from the shadows. A closer look reveals it's a beautiful woman with white hair and red clothes, and shouting, "My child, where are you?" On the other side, I was crying and running away fast, because there was a group of monsters behind me. I just cared about running for my life. A careless, right foot, a fracture. I fell heavily to the ground. The monster behind me immediately opened its bloody mouth and came at me, just as I thought I was about to die. But the monster's head was held down by a hand, only to discover that it was another, larger monster that had stopped. A large amount of blood instantly dripped all over my body. Just as I thought I was about to be eaten by him, he picked me up slowly, and then steadily put me on the ground. Under the eyes of the monsters full of doubts, the monster actually poked me in the back with his finger. In a flash, I was crying and shouting, "Mom!" I peed myself in fear. How I wished my mother would suddenly appear to save me. Just as the monster opened its mouth to devour me alive, suddenly I smelled a horrible scent approaching this way, and the little trash on the side broke out in a cold sweat. The monsters didn't have time to think about it and rushed towards the exit. Seeing them do this, I was standing there with a question mark on my face. At that moment, a foul smell suddenly rushed into my nose, and then a tentacle came out of the dark and hit me in the back. And then I fell to the ground heavily. At that moment, a footstep came from the corner. I saw a little red-eyed, black-clad zombie walking towards me, and he kept chanting, "Come and play." Am I really going to die today at the hands of this little kid? A young boy of 7 years old is looking for a playmate in a lair full of zombies. but the monsters fled when they saw him. Even the powerful chiefs didn't dare to mess with him, just because his mother was the dominant power in the area. With just one palm, she could slap hundreds of walkers to death. But the little girl in front of him had the courage to punch and kick him. In an instant, the two children began to attack each other. The difference in strength between them is not much, and the battle is fought back and forth. Maybe men are naturally afraid of female tigers. After the boy was bitten hard by the girl, he cried and shouted for his mother. Beaten and bruised, he ran away. The little girl standing in the same place is still furious, after seeing the other side run out of his sight. Wiping the sweat off his face while laughing, "Damn you little brats, how dare you mess with me?" In fact, it was because the other guy not only knocked her to the ground with one punch, and ate the candy she had managed to find. Not to mention that the girl's mother is also a powerful zombie queen. As I turned towards the group of spectators, they were surprised by my sneeze and fell away. That's when I smelled the stench coming from my body. I think it was the smell of the little boy who hadn't bathed in 10 years when I fought with him. I felt invincible at this moment. I didn't have time to think about it, so I rushed to my mother, and something caught me just a few steps away, and at the same time there was a voice. She gave off a foul stench and must be the child of the underground master. Hearing this, I slowly turned back to look. I saw two tall monsters with red eyes standing behind me. I was shocked to see this scene and shouted out loud. When they found out I was human, they tried to eat me, but after smelling my body, decided to give up, because I had contact with the child of the underground master. Must have known the direction he left. But when one of them saw my baby face, then the idea of eating me as a snack came up. See the situation. I could only cry and ask them to let go of me to find my mother. But the female monster actually laughed and said, "Son, how about I be your mother?" Younger me didn't know that the other person was taking advantage of me. I could only whisper my refusal. But the other person thought it was a yes, and she pouted at it. At this point, the male monster on the side was trying to sacrifice me to their father, because their purpose was for their father to improve his strength to eat the underground master. If the girl is offered as a sacrifice to the father, his power must have been greatly increased. Hearing this, the male monster replied ignorantly, "I caught it. Let me eat at least one of her arms." After saying I saw the male monster full of saliva, I was instantly scared by this scene and my whole body trembled. I thought, this is the end. If they take me away or eat me, I'll never see my beloved mother again in my life. I clenched my little fist and made a decision that scared them. I turned my head and shouted, "Mom, you're here." And then he ran quickly towards the exit. The two monsters who saw the scene looked at me with question marks on their faces. But they laughed unhurriedly. This weak and powerless little cutie runs really fast. After that, they immediately went after the girl in front of them. At this point, I was still running hard towards the exit. The people in front of me watching them rush towards them. Their jaws dropped in shock instantly. I had to go through them to stay alive, and I kept looking back to see how far the two monsters were from me. By this time, they had already started the massacre of the monsters. Seeing this scene, I thought, I have to find my mother quickly, or I will be there dead too. With that in mind, I ran faster in the direction I was going, but as a child, I couldn't outrun them. Not to mention that the other side was a powerful monster. Soon the tentacles of the female monster were behind me. Fortunately, I happened to have a fall. Perfectly dodged the attack she sent at me. I got up and quickly ran ahead. Soon I was panting and found a corner to hide in. How I wished my parents and sister Hila were around at that moment. Thinking of this, I once again left tears of missing and regret. At that moment, a voice suddenly came from behind me. "My good girl, Daddy's coming, don't cry." Just when I thought it was my father who found me, only to see that it was the male monster from earlier, and he was reaching out to me with his horrible claws. Looking at the black palm, I trembled and said I wanted to go home, but the hand that was bitten by the zombie was trembling. In the next second, the finger actually attacked the male monster on its own. The spikes instantly cut into the palm of the opponent's hand, yet he looked at the small wound with a careless face, but blinked and a stabbing pain suddenly came. The veins in his hands were bleeding like they were bursting. At this point, he felt his hands were burning, and kept asking me what I had done to him. At this point, I was looking at my index finger with a question mark on my face and sharp black nails. The infected finger underwent a horrible mutation, but the young me was no match for the monster in front of me. Not to mention the fact that after losing his arm, he became even more insane. At this moment, he wanted to cut this little one into pieces, and then eat she all up, without even a scrap. seeing that horrible look in the other side. I was so scared that I was shaking all over and backing up, but the male monster's hand had turned into a big knife and was coming at me. Just as the blade was 0.01 centimeters from my head, something suddenly flew out of the dark and hit him hard. The unsuspecting male monster was sent flying for tens of meters before hitting the ground. I was shocked to see this scene. That's when I realized that the thing that just flew by looked familiar, and when I looked closely, it was my father's backpack. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing down my face. I saw my father walking quickly and angrily towards me. "What are you trying to do to my daughter, you monster?" And he took me in his arms and said, "Good girl. Are you okay? It's my fault." He smelled my stench, and also saw my fingers mutate. But I was more worried about my mother. I cried and told my father that my mother had been caught by a large hand. Seeing my sad face, he took me into his arms again and shed tears of sadness himself. At this point, the male monster has risen to his feet. The mouth also kept cursing angrily. "Who the hell is it?" Suddenly came out to interfere with my work. "Do I look so bullyable? I'm gonna eat you all up." After that, his arm, which was cut off, grew out slowly. Seeing his opponent's fierce and vicious appearance, my father rushed me to hide behind him. "We'll go to mother when we've finished with the monster in front of us, and then we'll go home together and eat your favorite cookies." Found ignored by the monster gritted his teeth in anger. "Next thing you know, it's swearing at us, "You fucking human. How dare you look down on me?" And before he finished his words, and a brick hit him on the head. I saw father pick up a brick in his hand and say, "No swearing in front of children." The male monster came at us in a rage after hearing that. The father who saw the scene struggled to swing the brick in his hand, and then he quickly smashed it hard at the other side, but was slashed to pieces by the male monster. But the next second he felt a deadly danger approaching. He saw thousands of bricks flying towards his face. The attack rained down on his body instantly, and the bear kept picking up bricks from his backpack. And then he fires at the monsters in front of him. I must try to target his weaknesses. Dense brick smashed on the body of the monster, but instantly shattered. And the bricks in the backpack have been used up. The bear froze instantly when he found the empty backpack. Before he could react, the limbs and neck were then bound by the male monster's tentacles. I was worried and helpless when I saw my father suffocating. The male monster in front of me was still taunting. "Brat, no more bricks now, right? Even if you throw more, it's useless. My body will repair itself. Did you have a good time just now? I will taste your body slowly." At this point, the father was dying and said, "Kill me if you can." Hearing this, the male monster laughed and said, "I'll send you to Jesus right away." At that moment, a sudden chill came over him. In the blink of an eye, his arm had been cut off by a white-haired woman. Looking at the blood is spurting out of the male monster, still do not know what happened. It turns out that the person who cut off the other's arm was Gila. At this point, her bloodshot eyes were staring at the male monster and saying, "You monster. Now you're finished." Saying that, she has quickly launched a fierce attack on the monster. The badly wounded male monster could only keep dodging. Occasionally found the other side of the breakthrough, he only stretched out his tentacles to counterattack. However, before it could touch her, it was cut off. And the father on the other side was constantly sighing, "She's actually so good." All this way, she killed monsters when she saw them. Now she actually has so much energy. Such a powerful woman. Who is she? At this point, the male monster's strength has been depleted. The next second, he seems to remember something. The female monster on the other side was happily eating the fresh flesh of the zombie. She inquires to herself, where did her teammate go? After that, she thought, has the other team already eaten the little girl? She drooled and laughed at the thought of it. And now I can still smell her flesh. At that moment, something seemed to have tapped her on the shoulder, only to see a woman gazing coldly at herself. What sparks will these two powerful zombies spark? Looking at the woman in front of her, she instantly felt a little uneasy. The next second, the two were fighting quickly. This is when the female monster realized that her opponent's eyes were the same as her own father's. It felt like she was one of her own kind. Who the hell is she? By this time, the other man's fist was smashing into his own face. She's such a strong fighter. The female monster intends to see how strong she really is. I saw her reach out her sharp tentacles towards the zombie queen. She looked at the attack that was coming at her so fast. She was still thinking about her daughter. The next second, sharp nails emerged instantly, and then she grabbed at the incoming tentacles with a vengeance. In the blink of an eye, the female monster's tentacle was split in half. Feeling the pain hit her cold sweat straight. But before she could catch her breath, the other side came at her again. The female monster rushes to attack quickly with her tentacles. But it was easily and perfectly dodged by the opponent. She instantly felt disbelief when she saw this scene. At that moment, the sharp needle of the zombie queen had come to her. She had to use her palm to block it in a panic. The zombie queen looked at the female monster in front of her and thought, "I have to kill each other quickly so I can find my daughter." At this point, the female monster realized that she could not beat the woman in front of her. Suddenly, she felt like she couldn't move her frozen through hands. She couldn't even regenerate, not even the slightest sensation. Only then did she remember that she had not noticed that the other side kept attacking the same place. Is she paralyzing me? At this point, the female monster's whole body kept shaking. She thought, this guy is too strong. I'm no match for her. I can't even touch each other's bodies. Now there's only one last resort. Only she used her tentacle to cut off the split tentacle. Then she bit down hard on her wrist. A few moments later, a severed hand fell to the ground. Next second, the female monster has gritted her teeth and rushed towards the zombie queen. The zombie queen looked at his opponent, who was attacking him at all costs, and thought, "There's no time, I have to finish her off and get to my daughter." The female monster has come to her at this point. Just when we thought she was going to deliver the killing blow, she actually sprinkled the woman's eyes with blood from her arm. Unable to see, she rushed to rub her eyes with both hands. The female monster took this opportunity to escape quickly. I can't really win against that horrible monster. Right now, I have to find the male monster and then take revenge. But what she doesn't know is, the male monster was struggling to fight Gila. Whether it is speed or strength, both are similar. But the male monster's body can repair itself. I'm going to kill all three of you humans today. The more you talk, the more irritable the male monster quickly attacked towards Gila, facing the elephant-like monster. She could only hold the axe tightly in her hand, staring at each other with a murderous stare. A few moments later, the ground was covered with blood. The ground was strewn with severed arms and legs. A closer look reveals that the male monster that was screaming just now has had his limbs chopped off, but he's still muttering under his breath. Who the hell are you? You are obviously just an insignificant human. But why am I so miserable? On the side, Gila looks at the puzzled monster in front of her, as if she understood what he was thinking. You didn't think how the soft human is stronger than yourself as a monster. Why do you need to think so complicated? It's really just that you're too weak. And then she swung her axe at her opponent. But the next second, Gila suddenly stopped attacking, because the other side has killed itself. It's a more honorable way to die than at the hands of a human. Father, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Hearing what the other person said before he died, the three people fought. Who is the person behind him? The female monster on the other side was still running wildly, and she kept shouting her brother's name. But behind her came the roar of the zombie queen. At this moment, she is behind the other side, quickly chasing. You stinking kidnapper, give me back my daughter. The fleeing female monster just happened to run into her brother's suicide, randomly cursing loudly and angrily, "You bastards! What the hell did you do to my brother?" Meanwhile, the zombie queen arrived panting. "Finally, we got you. Where's my daughter?" Hearing my mother's voice, I rushed back to look. I was so happy to find out that it was really her. But Sister Gila, who didn't know her mother, was already rushing towards her, just as the two were about to fight. The bear holds Gila's arm in time. My mother was relieved to see that the three of us were safe and sound. She laughed and said, "It's dangerous here. Why did you come here?" The bear on the other side replied happily after hearing, "My family is in danger. Of course I'm coming to save you." But the other side ignored him, just kept asking where her daughter was. Apparently, the mother hadn't realized that I was right behind the father, and kept blaming herself for not protecting me. When I saw her like that, I rushed towards her with a smile. Seeing me unharmed, she shed tears of relief. I then gave her a loving hug. As a mother, don't you notice the changes in your own daughter? The father, who was standing by, immediately stood up and retorted, "You saved my daughter. I'm grateful to you, but what you said was just too much. It was my fault to begin with. Why take it out on my wife?" At this point, the mother rushed to her feet. Just when we all thought she was going to fight with Gila, but the zombie queen wrote what she wanted to say in the palm of the bear's hand. "Thank you for saving my daughter. It's my fault that she's like this. We have to find the necessary supplies here as soon as possible, and then go to Hope Village and get her medical treatment. I have nothing now." I will repay your kindness in the future. Then she asked for Gila's name. Hearing this, Gila realized what she had done, and she told my parents her name and her relationship with me. After telling the whole story, and they went on a journey together to find supplies, looking at the axe that Gila was holding. The zombie queen suddenly remembered that just now, when entering the lair, it was this axe that flew over the monster's head. Apparently, this woman saved her own life. Our journey to find supplies was anything but quiet. Every now and then a monster zombie would pop up, but before they could touch us, they were killed by 2 women. Soon we found the underground warehouse. When my father and I opened a package, it was stuffed with all kinds of supplies. Seeing this, we were so happy that we rushed to stuff things into our bags. My hands are holding the snacks that I love. I let out a long-lost laugh, and a light smile came on the faces of my mother and sister Gila. But when my mother behind me saw Gila, who was laughing and talking with me, she thought to herself, she came here just because she was a friend of Jufu's, even killing powerful monsters with ease. She's definitely not an ordinary person. But what can be determined is, thanks to her, Jufu was safe and sound. But why do I still feel so uneasy when I see her? Soon we filled our packs and headed for the exit. My father, who prevented me from running around, actually stuffed me into his clothes. Just when we thought we were going to make it to the exit, Mother suddenly felt an aura of danger approaching us, and there was a constant rumbling in the dark. Suddenly a pair of giant hands instantly reached out from inside. Seeing this, my mother hurriedly pushed my father and told us to go. In the blink of an eye, those giant hands are already very close to us, but the road ahead was blocked by a horde of zombie monsters. Seeing the giant hand, they were instantly scared and quickly ran towards the exit. But before we could get very far, there were 2 forks in the road ahead. Just as the father was asking which one to take, the giant hand suddenly reached ahead and blocked the intersection on the right. The father, who saw this scene, instantly dropped his jaw. It feels like we're going to be buried here today, but a side of Sister Gila can see that the other side is deliberately blocking the road. The zombie queen saw at once that the underground master was playing a trick on us. Now we must hurry and escape. And then suddenly there was an ominous laugh in the dark. 3 red eyes slowly light up at the same time. The crowd didn't have time to think about it and rushed towards the left fork in the road, running and praying that the intersection ahead was the right one. But the giant hand behind us is getting closer and closer. Just when we thought the exit was just ahead, what appeared before us was a wall that towered into the sky, and there was a group of monsters standing below. And the mother immediately came out in front of us. By this time, the giant hand had come to the front. Overhead stood the creepy woman in red. Clearly the other side is the powerful master of the underground village. Eyes constantly surveyed us below. When she saw the zombie queen with a mouth full of fangs and yellow eyes, suddenly laughed. Finally, you found the bastard. The bear on the other side heard and immediately asked his wife if she knew her. At this time, the corpse king's mind is all about the other side of the scene. I never thought this monster could talk. If you talk about what makes her different from the other monsters, I think it's the lump of flesh that grows on the front of the chest. But why does she have the same color eyes as me? It always felt like she was strange and very familiar at the same time. Who the hell is she? Suddenly, the other man's foot hit the ground heavily and said, I have suffered for you. But at this time you are by my side. You took my flesh, and I must have it back. The husband behind her listened and hurriedly asked her if she had taken something from someone else. If so, hurry up and give it back to her and run for your life. However, the zombie queen kept shaking his head to say she didn't take it. The overlord at the front smiled and said, It's not surprising that you don't know me. After all, with my current appearance it is difficult to be recognized. Anyway, all I have to do is kill you and get the body back. Next, will they be able to defeat the master of the powerful underground village? Will they be able to find the exit and go home without any problems? 7-year-old girl dares to point at zombie overlords and swear at them, and beat her son's head bloody. Because in her mind the mother is the most precious in the world. Yet in the face of the overlord, she realized how small she was. With just one hand, she could slap them to pieces. But in order to protect the family can safely leave, Zombie Queen still rushed towards the other side regardless of life and death. However, the overlord who saw the scene let out a creepy laugh. The hands under the feet fiercely towards each other quickly grabbed. At this time Zombie Queen with sharp claws in the attack to its. In an instant, blood was spurting out. The overlord who saw this scene was incredulous. It was so hard to find this body that was invulnerable to swords and spears. The opponent could easily pierce it with a sharp claw. A stab of pain came over her and she didn't dare to move, only in place to let out a heartbreaking roar. Zombie Queen saw this and rushed to attack her opponent. She must be disposed of as soon as possible she can get her family out safely. But in the next second, one foot was actually tied by something. Bear and Gila, who were fighting the zombie monster, saw this scene and were instantly dumbfounded, because the head at the feet of the Overlord stretched out a long tongue to trap the Zombie Queen's feet. At this point she was only a hair's breadth away from her opponent. However, the Overlord's next words shocked her. "How was my acting? Did it fool you? Now that you've come forward, I'll be polite." Zombie Queen listened and a feeling of death instantly came over her, but it was too late to escape the control of the other side, because the long tongue of the Overlord had thrown her high into the air. The bear below suddenly felt bad when he saw this scene, and then the father and daughter shouted no. But it was already too late. A white light was seen along with a rumbling sound. Zombie Queen has been thrown from a height by the other side. Seeing this scene, I rushed to call out Mom. After a few moments, the giant hand of the Overlord was recovering at a rate visible to the naked eye, and she keeps taunting the Zombie Queen below. "You are so disappointing to me. You want to kill me even with a little character like you? What a fool. Blame it on the fact that you are too weak." Hearing her mocking words, I gritted my teeth in anger. Then I broke away from my father's embrace and jumped to the ground, then desperately rushed towards the Overlord, and shouting at the top of her lungs, "Don't bully my mother." Seeing this scene, Gila rushed to ask the bear to catch me. Seeing this, he quickly went after his daughter, but every now and then a walker would come along and block the way. He can only kill this monster first in order to chase his daughter, but by this time I had already rushed to my mother's side. I found that her pupils had become black. The Zombie Queen's mind remembered when she was human. The back of her head was inexplicably filled with spikes. "It feels like it's life-threatening to myself and my child." Immediately yanked it outward with both hands and tried to pull it out. The mouth also kept yelling for it to get away. In the moment of crisis, she put all her strength into her hands. In an instant, countless spikes were pulled out by her. Overworked, she sat down on the ground. Just as she was gasping for breath and saying, "I'm okay," she saw a horrible sight, because the other end of those spikes had grown claws, and it was arrogantly approaching itself slowly. Just as she was staring unblinkingly at the other side, the spikes suddenly opened their claws and came at her. The woman who saw this scene was at her wit's end. I could only cover my ears with my hands and shout, "Don't come over here." In an instant, Zombie Queen woke up from the shouting, and it seemed she just heard her daughter's voice. Seeing this, she could only slowly get up with her shattered body. Only when she looked closely did she realize that her daughter was protecting herself in front of her. Even though she was afraid, she trembled and pointed her mutated finger at the Overlord in anger. Seeing this, Zombie Queen trembled and told her daughter to run in a low voice. On the side, Gila and Bear were also shouting. She looked at the Overlord who could poke her daughter with one finger. The Zombie Queen was feeling overwhelmed at this point. Zombie Queen was unable to move because of the severe impact on her body. "If this goes on, my daughter will really be killed." But at this point the Overlord had the patience to ask the little one questions. "Who the hell are you? Are you a human or a monster? If it's human, how come it has my flesh?" At this point I don't even want to answer this big devil, and then yelled, "You idiot, don't hit my mother." The Zombie Queen, sitting on the ground, saw the scene and was distraught. But the Overlord was already laughing and walking towards them. Will the mother and daughter be killed by her? And when the giant hand of the other side comes above us, I was really scared to death, because I didn't want my mother to die for me. I couldn't pull her even with all my strength. When she saw this, she immediately scolded me and told me to go. However, at this time, I could not bear to leave my mother behind. Hearing this, the Zombie Queen's eyes were filled with love. Thinking, I'm really useless, I can't even protect my daughter. She wouldn't give up, so why couldn't I hold on a little longer? I'm such a disappointment as a mother. With that, she couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating laugh. I had to pull myself together for my daughter and my family. Then she took her daughter in her arms. She didn't know that the spikes on the back of her head were rapidly mutating. In the next second, her whole body suddenly blackened completely. But the Overlord standing on the sidelines was oblivious. Instead, she was still laughing crazily and evil, saying, "I'm back at last." But Bear and Gila looked at her with a puzzled face when they heard that. A closer look reveals that the Overlord's giant hand is melting away at a rate visible to the naked eye. Before she could react, an explosion suddenly sounded behind her. Immediately afterwards, the flesh underneath the feet was breaking apart rapidly. The giant hand also expands and explodes like a balloon. Even her own body began to shatter. It was then that she realized that Zombie Queen was awakening. Only when she looked closely did she realize that her opponent was already several meters away from her, and the body had split open. The two men stood looking at each other's decaying flesh and instantly froze in place. They don't know what the hell just happened. Only I know what happened in that short time. At that moment, my mother had an extra spike on the back of her head. Seeing the other side's combat power instantly increased several times, the Overlord's face became gloomy down. She looked at the arm that had been decayed to nothing and said, "I admit that you are very strong. Although I would like to end this mercifully. But you're getting worse and worse." Said a pair of giant hands had quickly grabbed towards several people. In an instant it came above their heads. Just when we thought she was going to crush them to a pulp. But the Overlord grabbed dozens of walkers off the ground. Immediately after, it opened its huge mouth that can devour everything. And the next second, she threw the corpse into his mouth and swallowed it. Below, we were filled with shock at the sight that appeared before us. For by now the Overlord had become as tall as a mountain. The slightest stomp of the foot shook like an earthquake. The saliva dripped from her mouth like a waterfall. It is as if we had become her food. And then giggling and striding towards us. The only word I could use to describe this scene was big. However, the cold sweat on the father's head was rising. He thought, it's impossible to kill her. Even hiding or running away was nonsense. She killed us as easy as squashing an ant. At that moment, my mother suddenly handed me to my father. Her eyes were as if she was praying to her husband to take care of her daughter. Looking at the mother's face, we already know what she's going to do next. No matter how much father tried to stop her, it was useless. If you're going to leave, you're going to die this time. Before the words were finished, his wife's hands were on his cheeks. Then she laughed and said, "Darling, wait for me to come back. I will end this and bring you home." Bear listened and clenched his fists tightly. He actually wanted to help. But as a human he was too weak. And he promised his wife that he would take care of his daughter, for not to worry her as a wife and mother. Father and daughter smiling and saying goodbye to her. Zombie Queen also smiles and turns towards the massive Overlord. But in the next second, the crowd was looking ahead with frightened eyes. It turned out that the Overlord had come to them at that moment. Seeing this, my father hastily hugged me and left quickly. The Overlord looked down at them like ants and laughed. "I really can't understand. How could someone make a reckless choice to protect his family? Even though I have a family. But this sacrifice is too strange. Children must obey their parents and put us first, to repay us for the kindness we have given them. This is the real family." By now Zombie Queen had flown up behind her and replied, "What kind of family is that? That's treating them like slaves. People like you are not worthy to be parents." And with that, the spikes on the back of her head were swinging towards her opponent. Just when we thought the fatal blow would pierce the opponent's body. But suddenly a wall of flesh appears to block her attack. Then mocked, "You're really annoying, you cheeky, shameless guy." The words are not finished. The giant hand has swung heavily at Zombie Queen. But instead of dodging, she blocked it with her side. So she did it just to get close to the other person, followed by a quick scratch on her arm with a sharp nail. Just when she thought her plan would work, both feet were suddenly tied up by each other's tentacles. Even with all her efforts, she could not get out. Before she could react, and she was yanked in the other giant hand of the Overlord. "How dare you scratch my arm, you fucking bitch. I'll crush your whole body to pieces." Can the Zombie Queen, who is in the hands of the opponent, struggle to escape? At this point, the Zombie Queen is starting to feel a little dizzy. Just when she thought she was going to be squeezed to a pulp by the giant baby, the Overlord's body suddenly and inexplicably tilted. The next second, she fell directly to the ground with a heavy knee. Zombie Queen also took the opportunity to break free from her grasp. A closer look reveals. It turned out to be a bloody hole that had been gouged out of her right foot. It turned out that it was the mighty Gila who had seriously injured her opponent. The Zombie Queen is seen escaping from the giant baby. She hurriedly shouted, "I'll buy you time. You take out the Overlord as soon as possible." Hearing this, Zombie Queen quickly stood up. With that, he shouted and flew towards the other side. On the other side, Hilla also rushed towards the giant baby, not to be outdone. In order to protect the family, Zombie Queen completely blackened. "Even if I die, I have to find a way to get my husband and daughter out of here." Hearing this, Hila, who was fighting, said, "Bear, you take Jufu away just fine. The two of us stayed behind to block. You should be able to hold her and get out of here safely." Apparently, the other person was Hila herself. Neither of them wants to lose a loved one. To make sure that everyone gets out in one piece, We have to kill the giant baby that's as tall as a mountain. Saying that, the two instantly exploded into unprecedented combat power, facing the Berserk 2. A giant baby is not a sheep. In an instant, the arms and legs became twice as big as they were a moment ago. And then she roared at them with a roar that rang through the sky. But the overlord at the head of the giant baby didn't care. A bunch of insignificant little pieces of crap. This fearless choice will only get you killed for nothing. The two of them, in concert with each other, have created a fierce wind. Hiding on the sidelines, I took in the amazing battle. At that moment, both my father and I heard a voice suddenly coming from the shadows. With puzzled faces, we turned our heads to look. It was a black child. I looked closely and remembered that it was the same kid that I had beaten up and fled. When my father saw him, he asked me with a puzzled face, "Who is this dark little friend? And he smells so bad." Hearing this, I hurriedly replied, "He bullied me. He hit me with the hand that could reach out so far." And before I could finish, my father laughed and said he would teach the other man a lesson. But when he saw the creepy little monster, he had an uneasy feeling. He didn't know that when the black kid saw the girl who had beaten him to death, he wanted to swallow his opponent alive with his hands clenched in fists. I found that the other side looked at me with that murderous look. At this point, I was bold enough to make a face at him. The boy who saw this scene ran towards us while shouting, "Come and play." The father kicked and cursed, "Get out of here, you little brat." The child found the big shoe in front of him, momentarily stopped and stood still, hesitating. The father thought when he found that the other side was weaker than he thought. How could such a weak monster boy be here? Usually when a monster feels danger, it runs away. Why would he come alone to such a dangerous place? By now the boy's attention had been drawn to the battle nearby. He looked at the massive monsters towering over, and on top of the gargoyle's head stood a woman with white hair. He instantly became dumbfounded and muttered under his breath, "Come and play." The bear, who was standing on the sidelines watching the other side, was full of questions. Don't even know what the little kid just said. At this point, the battle there had reached a white-hot stage. As a human, Gila has been beaten with blood and sat on the ground motionless. Zombie Queen was also covered in blood and gasping for breath, because at that moment she was once again in the hands of the giant baby. And the overlord from above said with a face full of disdain, "This is the reality. Whether you're sacrificing for your family, or reveal the hidden mighty power, are useless. You now have only despair. But what's with that look in your eyes? It makes me look really nasty." The zombie queen is staring coldly at the overlord. If her eyes could kill, she would have killed him hundreds of times. The giant baby saw the other side looking at her mother like that, and then he opened his bloody mouth. The long tongue even reached the zombie queen's face, as if she was going to be eaten in the next second. Just as zombie queen was about to fight to the death, there was a sudden shout from behind. The two women quickly turned their heads in the direction of the sound, only to find that the bear was holding up the boy, shouting, "Put my wife down, or I will kill your child." The bold me also screamed at the sight for her to let go of my mother. Looking at the boy, who had some resemblance to himself, the overlord said, "Isn't this the master's child? What do you rubes want to do with him?" Zombie Queen saw this and told them to run. "Do you even have to ask? Take him as a hostage, of course." Hearing this, the boy was instantly frightened and shouted, "I didn't expect the overlord to say coldly, 'You want to threaten me with affection?' It doesn't make any sense at all. It's just superfluous." Then she wanted the giant baby to slap the people below to death. However, in the next second, she felt a sudden stinging pain in her fingers. The bear below listened and held up the boy and shouted sternly, "So I let him sunbathe without fear?" The boy kept crying, "Come and play ah." At this point, the overlord's eyes were filled with wonder, because her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Unexpectedly, the boy below suddenly shouted "Mom" with tears streaming down his face. Hearing the familiar voice coming from the overlord's pupils instantly light up. She remembered the scene once. At that time she was happy with her son every day, feeding him his favorite meat, stroking his cute baby cheeks with both hands. And by now she was trembling all over with tears. The black eyes on her chest felt that she was emotionally affected, trying to get out of its grip. With the sound of crunching, the overlord instantly felt the heartbreaking pain and kept screaming. Obviously, Black Eye understood that she had been shaken when she saw the child. Is this the most powerful thing about a mother's love? It has no choice but to take the body first, then control the giant hand to release the zombie queen in her hands. Will she be able to defeat the overlord and save her family and leave?